The easiest way to see how to create and display a fragment is to jump straight into code. Right now, our app doesn't display anything, and we'll want to create fragments that display our Android body parts. Let's start by just displaying the head. To create a fragment, the first thing I'll need to do is define a new layout file for what I want the fragment to look like. This layout will define what view or views I want the fragment to contain. And I'll name this Fragment Body Part. And I want this to display an image of a head or any other body part, and so I'll just have it be a single image view. Then click OK to create. Now if we look in here, it's just a single image view. Now we have our image view, and I just need to give it an ID so I can refer to it later on. It's a good idea to always provide a descriptive ID, so I'll give this image view an ID Body Part Image View. And at the top, I'll add a descriptive comment. Now let's go back to our to-dos. The next step is to create a new class called BodyPartFragment that will display an image of an Android Me body part. This fragment class will inflate the layout that we just created. So in the UI folder, I'll create a fragment by creating a new class. I'll name it BodyPartFragment since it will hold the Android body part images, and its superclass will be Fragment. And I'm using the fragment from the support library. Then click OK. Now we have an empty class that extends from Fragment. This extension is important because it's how Android knows to treat this class and its lifecycle events and creation as a fragment. Now every fragment will implement a couple of methods. The first is an empty constructor that's necessary for instantiating the fragment. The second is a method onCreateView, which is called when the fragment layout that we just created is inflated for display, similar to onCreate for an activity. So make sure to implement both of these methods for any fragment you create. In onCreateView is where we should write code to inflate the body part fragment layout. I'll call this inflated layout rootView. I'll also get a reference to the image view this will display by calling findViewById on our body part image view. Now I'll also be able to set the image resource to be the ID of whatever image I want this to display. For now, let's just display the first image in the list of heads. To get the list, we use our utility class, Android Image Assets. And we call getHeads. This returns a list of all the image IDs we're interested in. Then finally, we call getZero to get the first item in the list at index 0. We'll later update this code to display any image we want. Finally, I'll just return the root view that this has created. Now we're almost done. We've created the fragment class and its layout, but we need to include some code in our Android Me activity that actually displays the fragment. This is because every fragment needs to be embedded in a host activity. So let's go back to our Android Me activity code. First, I'll need to define a place in the activity Android Me layout file for our fragment to go. This is known as a fragment container. It's typically a frame layout of some defined size, in this case 180 dip high and the full width of the phone screen. This defines the space that a fragment will take up in a layout, and I'll give this an ID head container. Now that we have a fragment container, let's move back to the Android Me activity code. In here, in onCreate, I'll create a new instance of a body part fragment called head fragment. Then I'll use something called a fragment manager and a transaction to actually add this new fragment to the screen. This transaction essentially adds our fragment to the specified container. And we'll be learning more about the fragment manager in just a little bit, so I've provided this transaction code in the instructor notes below. This is mainly so that you can run the app and visually see if your fragment looks like you expect. So let's run the app on a phone and see. And here's our head fragment. It looks great. We've coded and displayed the first fragment. Next, it will be up to you to follow along with the to-dos in the code. Create a body part fragment and display it. And remember, there are 3 main parts to this task. First, creating the layout file that defines what the body part fragment looks like. Second, creating the corresponding fragment class that inflates the layout and defines what image will be displayed. And third, displaying that fragment through its host activity using a fragment manager and a transaction. Good luck!